All right, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining me. I'm Ryan Ross. I am the Director of the History and Traditions programs here at the University of Illinois Alumni Association and Deputy Editor of Illinois Alumni Magazine and the Curator and Collections Manager of the Richmond Family Welcome Gallery, the university's interactive heritage museum. So, this evening, we're going to talk about the history of one of Illinois' most enduring traditions, the annual homecoming celebration. We'll cover its origin story and the ideas behind its creation, its role in the university landscape over the years, and the traditions related to homecoming that have come and gone over the past century. But before we begin, I have a couple housekeeping items. First, I'd like to mention an upcoming webinar in the Alumni Association Speaker Series. Please join us on October 2nd at 6 p.m. Central Time for a talk called New Insights and Enduring Principles for Building Strong Families, presented by Dr. Alan Barton, an associate professor and extension specialist in human development and family studies. Dr. Barton will highlight a range of findings that illustrate sources of strength as well as challenges for modern day families. I added the registration link to the chat in your toolbar. So if you're interested in attending that, please use that link to sign up. Second thing, if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to use uh, the Q&A feature in the toolbar to ask them. And at the end, I'll answer as many questions as we have time for. So that's everything. So here we go. So we'll start with homecoming's origin story. And like any good origin story, the story of how homecoming began at Illinois has become shrouded in myth and legend. The story goes that on a spring day in 1910, when the main quad looked like it does on the slide, two members of the senior class were sitting on the steps of the old university YMCA talking about their impending graduation and how much they would miss being on campus. They were the 28-year-old Walter Elmer Eckblaw and the 23-year-old Clarence Foss Williams, and they decided that they wanted to do, quote unquote, something big to honor the university. You can see them there on the slide 40 years later, recreating that day on the steps of the building, which had then become Illini Hall. Rest in peace. What they'd come up with was an idea for an event that would be like Old Home Week in New England villages when former residents came back to their hometown for a reunion and celebration. Ekblom and Williams thought an Illinois football game could serve as a magnet that would get alumni to return to campus, and they would organize related events around the game. And they would call their celebration Homecoming. The university's first homecoming began on October 14th, 1910. It was a joint production of the campus's two senior honorary societies, Shield and Trident, with the co-founder, Elmer Eckblaw, serving as chair of the planning committee. The year's first program featured a variety of events for returning alumni, students, and the campus and local communities, setting a template for the years that followed. The schedule of events may seem a little odd to a modern audience, with its baseball game, with baseball spelled as two words, an interclass track meet, an inspection of campus buildings, which were decorated in orange and blue bunting, and two long gone traditions I'll discuss in a few minutes: the pushball contest and the hobo band parade. From that first homecoming, a few traditions endure, such as reunions and the culmination of the homecoming celebration, the football game. The motivating factor behind homecoming was to bring a large number of alumni back to campus to reconnect with each other, relive their U of I memories, and connect with current students. However, there was already an event on the university calendar that did that, the annual commencement ceremony in the spring. Traditionally, the Alumni Association had organized class and organization reunions as part of commencement, and those celebrations were well attended and beloved experiences for returning alumni and current students alike. Ekbal and Williams's idea would move those reunions to the fall, giving them their own focus and ensuring that they were not overshadowed by commencement. I know this is a surprise to no one, but people do not like change. And the decision to move the reunions to the fall was a major sticking point for a lot of alumni who were vocal about their displeasure in breaking from tradition. Some viewed the change as an excuse to sell more football tickets and boycotted the event. But all in all, the first homecoming was a success. 1,500 alumni returned to campus, which was more than had ever returned for the reunions during spring commencement. And the university administration decided to make homecoming an annual event. In general, students and alumni love the idea of an annual homecoming, and local business owners love the influx of people to Champaign-Urbana. The slide shows one of the earliest homecoming reunions for the classes of 1876 to 1880, and a more recent homecoming reunion of the 50s Black Illini, African American alumni of the 1950s. As I said earlier, the culmination of homecoming at Illinois has always been a football game. And our first homecoming game was a 3-0 victory against the University of Chicago, back when Chicago was one of the powerhouses of college football, which seems weird, but uh, nonetheless true. We played the first homecoming game at Illinois Field, which was the home of the football team until Geese Memorial Stadium opened in 1923. Illinois Field contained bleacher seating and had limited capacity for fans, only 18,000 at what would be considered its largest. As the football team grew in popularity in the 1910s, Illinois Field quickly became inadequate. Sellouts were common, and eager fans who missed out on tickets risked life and limb by climbing it up to the tops of trees that surrounded Illinois Field to see the game. And you can see some of them in this photo on the left, up in the trees, watching the 1914 homecoming game. Illinois Field was not only home of the football team, but also hosted baseball, track and field, band concerts, the interscholastic circus, homecoming bonfires, military drill, commencement, and a series of annual class competitions, which I'll discuss in a few minutes. Illinois Field was located on the north side of campus near the site of the first university building, which was nicknamed the Elephant. Uh, and that building had been torn down in 1880 after it was badly damaged in a storm. Today, the former site of Illinois Field is the location of the Beckman Institute for Advanced Science and Technology and the Electrical and Computer Engineering building. Since the inception of homecoming at Illinois, alumni, students, and university administrators have claimed that the U of I invented the homecoming tradition in the United States. That idea stems from the Daily Illini, which ran an enthusiastic editorial following the 1910 homecoming that called the U of I, quote unquote, the originator of homecoming. That claim spread like wildfire in 1910, and the idea that Illinois invented homecoming was passed down from generation to generation of alumni and students. In 2005, the historian John Franch disproved the idea, finding evidence that Michigan, Indiana, and Northern Illinois had held events like homecoming before 1910, but without using the title homecoming, and that Baylor University had hosted an event that they called homecoming in 1909. However, those events were not created to be annual traditions as Illinois' celebration was. So while we are not the first, we can claim to have the longest continuous homecoming celebration. Illinois has held a homecoming celebration every year since 1910, except for 1918, when the event was canceled due to the United States involvement in World War I. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. For now, I'll share a few of the traditions and features that have been common to homecoming over the past century. We've already established that the main event for homecoming has always been a Saturday football game, and usually against a Big Ten rival. While there have been many memorable contests over the years, perhaps two of the most significant games came early in 1923 and 1924. The 1923 homecoming game was the very first game played in what is now Geese Memorial Stadium. The excitement over christening the new stadium with a homecoming game allowed fans to overlook the fact that the stadium was unfinished, though some fans reported that their seats near the end of the bleachers had no walls or railings to protect them from a treacherous drop. Nevertheless, more than 62,000 fans showed up to watch Illinois defeat the University of Chicago 7 to nothing on a very rainy day that turned the field into a swamp. But we won anyway, and at the end of the year, Illinois was named the national champion. The 1924 homecoming game is notable because it not only served as the official dedication of the stadium, but it also became one of the most iconic games in the history of sports. That day, the Illinois halfback Red Grange scored 4 touchdowns in the game's first 12 minutes against Michigan, and sports writers turned him into a legend. He would go on to become the first big star of the National Football League with the Chicago Bears, and later he was a member of the university's board of trustees. In 2008, ESPN named Grange the greatest college football player of all time, and today the area west of the stadium is named Grange Grove in his honor, with a larger than life statue welcoming visitors to the place where his legend was cemented on a homecoming Saturday more than 100 years ago. The homecoming game brings with it several other enduring traditions, such as the halftime performances by the Marching Illini. At the time of the first homecoming, the Marching Illini we know today was called the Football Band, and you can see them there at a couple of early homecomings on the slide. Over time, the band's the homecoming performance, has grown more elaborate with the inclusion of an alumni band, cheerleaders, dancers, and majorettes. The musicians perform the band's current and historical repertoire and often create special formations like one that honored football coach Robert Zupke's 25th season at Illinois in 1937, which is shown there on the top right. One result of the homecoming tradition is the creation of keepsake items, such as programs from the football game, which include team rosters, song and cheer lyrics, and campus information. Although the program covers from more recent decades have used photographs of football players and campus scenes, the early programs featured beautiful artwork and are highly collectible today. Here are a few from the 1910s and 20s, and here are a few more from the 30s and 40s. And my favorite is that one on the right because that guy looks insane. He just loves homecoming. Another collectible item that has been produced nearly every year is the homecoming pen. Through photographs and illustrations, these carefully designed keepsakes not only reflect the styles of the decades in which they were produced, but also give you a sense of what was happening on campus and in society at the time. Every year, alumni pass through the Alice Campbell Alumni Center or the Illini Union Bookstore on homecoming Saturday to pick up the newest pen on their way to the game. Today, there is a small but dedicated community of alumni that collect these pens as a hobby. People who scour flea markets, estate sales, and eBay to find that one missing pen that would complete their collection. And here are a few more homecoming pens. Another long-lasting tradition is the pep rally. It was originally held on Illinois Field where the football game would take place later in that weekend, and it eventually shifted to the main quad. Throughout its history, the pep rally has included a bonfire, fireworks, performances by the university bands, cheerleaders, and dance team, and speeches by coaches, student athletes, and university administrators. In the 2010s, the pep rally was canceled for a few years due to lack of interest. But in recent years, it was reinstated and moved to Grange Grove near Memorial Stadium. But the pep rally has not regained its popularity and has remained an irregular part of the homecoming celebration. Here's the pep rally bonfire from 1968, which seems uh, safe. Unlike the pep rally, which was an enduring tradition for decades, some of our earliest homecoming traditions were short lived. In the university's early years, when enrollment was low enough that the students knew each other by sight, there was a strong sense of class rivalry on campus, kind of like class rivalries that we have in high school. By the 1890s, those class rivalries became better organized in the form of a contest that came to be known as the class scrap. The first version of the class scrap was a game uh, between the freshmen and sophomores called Color Rush. Color Rush was incredibly dangerous and resulted in many injuries and suspensions from the university. The Daily Illini described the event, quote, two poles, greased and bearing the class colors at the top, were planted about 60 feet apart. Equal numbers of freshmen and sophomores guarded the poles which bore their colors, while two other groups, equally divided, sought to tear down the colors, unquote. Color Rush was held on Illinois Field, where our teams played football and baseball and competed in track and field, as I said earlier. So this would be a little bit like the university hosting a game like this on the field at the stadium today, which just seems bananas. Uh, but I hope you can get a sense of what this game was like. This man is up on the pole, and people were just trying to rip him off the pole and get the colors off the top. By the time the university held its first homecoming in 1910, the color rush had been banned and replaced by a new contest called pushball. Pushball was part of the homecoming events until 1913 when the university banned it for being too dangerous. And it's a little wonder that it was dangerous since the objective of the game was for two teams of 11 players each to push a ball that was 6 feet in diameter and weighed 50 pounds, often above their heads, uh, to try to get it over a goalpost. After the university banned it, students introduced a new game for homecoming that was even more dangerous called sack rush. In sack rush, the freshman and sophomore classes would line up across from each other on a playing field. A line of canvas sacks would be spread out on the ground between the classes in the middle of the field. A gun would fire, and the classes would run at the sacks with the object to collect as many as possible. Essentially, this was an excuse for an organized melee, and there were many, many injuries. Sack Rush was a featured event at homecoming in 1913, 14, and 15, but after those 3 years, the university banned the event. And it's shocking that they let it go on for that long. Here on the slide, we have an image of the very last Sack Rush, which took place on an open field where the architecture building and David Kinley Hall are today. In the background, you can see the former surveying building, which is now the Richard D. and Anne Marie Irwin Doctoral Study Hall. And you can also see the armory, which was only 3 years old at the time. The image at the top right is from the student scrapbook of Arthur Froley, a member of the class of 1919, who completed his degree in 1921 after his studies were interrupted by World War I. The image shows a piece from one of the sacks that Froley kept, as well as his homecoming pens and a stadium builder pen from the stadium fundraising campaign. The image on the bottom right shows two students fighting over a sack in the 1914 contest. After the end of World War I, students brought back the class scrap in a different form. The 1919 homecoming events included boxing and wrestling matches and a tug of war. By the early 1920s, however, students were trying to bring back the class scrap games of the past, such as Collar Rush, and due to safety concerns, the university put a stop to the class scrap in 1923, and it never returned. The losing class in each of these contests, collar rush, push ball, sack rush, and the last version of the class scrap, would be forced to jump into the Boneyard Creek, which was just an open sewer at the time. Here on the slide, we can see the losing class in 1914 taking a dip in the Boneyard. Another relic from homecoming's early years is the Hobo Band Parade, which featured students dressed as hobos, clowns, and other characters, parading through campus town and playing instruments. The Hobo Band Parade was already an established Illinois tradition when homecoming started, and it was an annual part of the event through 1933. At the height of the Great Depression, when unemployment was at 25% and it no longer seemed like a fun idea to dress as a hobo, the parade was discontinued. Following the Depression, students briefly revived the Hobo Band Parade, and it was held for a final time in 1946. A much longer running tradition is the General Homecoming Parade, which takes place the night before the football game. The parade often features a Grand Marshal, which is usually a prominent alumnus, and this year the Grand Marshals will be the band REO Speedwagon, which was just announced yesterday. Over the decades, the parade has also included the marching Illini, sports teams, student organizations, fraternities and sororities, university administrators, floats, cheerleaders, and many other campus representatives performing for a captive audience from the local and campus communities. Due to declining attendance and a lack of interest, the parade was canceled in 1969 and did not reappear until 1979 when the Student Alumni Association brought it back. Here's the parade from 1968, the last year it was held until 1979. You can see from the signs toward the back that many students used the parade as an opportunity to protest the Vietnam War, which was part of the reason why it got canceled the next year. Since 1979, the parade has been well attended and is one of the highlights of homecoming week. On the slide, we have two important features of the parade. Honorees, such as the late U of I president Stan Eikenberry and his wife Judy, taking their victory lap during their final year in the president's house in 1994. And on the right, the marching Illini, which remain an annual favorite for parade goers. A decades-long tradition related to the parade was the float building contest, in which organizations from all over campus tried to best each other by creating a float according to that year's homecoming theme. Here are a couple more examples of the float building contest from the 80s and 90s. Along those same lines, starting in the 1920s and for decades afterwards, the fraternities and sororities on campus would decorate their houses, sometimes poking fun at that year's football opponent, like in the photo on the left, which shows a crashed airplane with Wolverines painted on the side for the University of Michigan. And sometimes they would decorate according to that year's homecoming theme, like the photo on the right, which shows two students bowing down to football coach Bob Zupke in honor of his 25th season in Illinois. Here's some more examples of house decorations from the 1930s on the left and from the 60s on the right. And another house decoration from 1969 when homecoming was on Halloween. This one was by the Women's Cooperative House Wescoga, which was affiliated with the campus's Wesley Foundation and was located about 50 yards from where the Alumni Center is today. Along with the festivities of parades and decorating contests, the celebration has also included a homecoming court. The tradition started in 1936 when Dolores Thomas Sims from the class of 39 was named the first U of I homecoming queen, and you can see her there on the right. Another first occurred in 1951 when Clarice Davis Presnell became the first African American to be named homecoming queen at a Big Ten university. 4 years later, Korean native Duk Chu Oh became the first East Asian student to serve as queen. The university did not name a homecoming king until 1979, when it was introduced by the Student Alumni Association as part of a new wave of homecoming traditions. Another long running homecoming tradition was an annual variety program called the Stunt Show. The Stunt Show first appeared in 1919 as the Co-Ed Carnival, and over the next 50 years, it featured fraternities, sororities, and other campus groups performing skits about pop culture, student life, and national news on stages at the buildings now known as Follinger Auditorium and State Farm Center. In 1968, in the lead up to more widespread student protests on campus, the show was politically charged and featured skits about the Vietnam War. The following year, organizers decided to replace the event with a magic show, and it was never held again. It looks like a good time, though. Student dances were another long running tradition of homecoming. In the early years of the event, popular dance bands would come to campus, performing at venues such as the Bradley Dance Hall on Wright Street and Huff Gym when it was the home of Illinois basketball, commencement, and student convocations. Concerts have also been a staple of the homecoming celebration, beginning with classical performances and opera in the early years, and adapting as alumni and students' musical tastes changed over the decades. Recent years have featured concerts in a wide variety of genres, everything from Bob Dylan to the a cappella group Pentatonics and the country singer Dierks Bentley. Starting in 2020, the university began creating Spotify playlists for homecoming that feature many of the musical artists that have performed on campus since the 1960s, including many artists who appeared during homecoming. The playlists are a lot of fun, so if you use Spotify, I encourage you to look up the U of I's account, which is called Illinois 1867, and start listening. And full disclosure, I made the playlists. Uh, Please listen. It's a good time. Finally, comedy shows have also been a popular part of the week's events, especially in recent years. Comedians of various levels of renown perform at the State Farm Center, Illini Union, and other campus venues, and have included the former host of The Daily Show, Trevor Noah, as well as Jim Gaffigan, Saturday Night Live's Jay Farrow, and Marlon Wayans. In this next section, we'll talk about how the popularity of homecoming has been impacted throughout its history by both the quality of the football team and changes in US society. During the 1910s, homecoming was brand new, alumni and students were excited about it, and the football team was really good. The event was extremely popular and soon became the university's busiest weekend of the year, aside from commencement in the spring. It seemed that nothing could stop the event's momentum. And then in 1918, the university experienced a double whammy in the form of a global war and a global pandemic. In October 1918, the United States was still involved in World War I, though it was only a month shy of the November 11th armistice that would stop the fighting. The university had played an active role in the war since the US's entry in April 1917, offering campus facilities for military training as part of the Student Army Training Corps and the School of Military Aeronautics. By the start of the fall 1918 semester, there were nearly 3,500 military trainees on campus, comprising more than half the student body at that time. The influx of trainees led to a housing shortage, and the university responded by taking over Greek houses and the women's residence hall and installing beds in the armory, which is shown there on the slide. With the country embroiled in the war and the campus landscape transformed by the large military presence, annual celebrations such as homecoming were placed on the back burner. And by the fall, no plans had been made for a homecoming celebration. At the same time, the US was several months into the Spanish flu pandemic that would ultimately kill 50 million people around the world, including 675,000 in the United States. Much like the COVID-19 pandemic, the Spanish flu first appeared in the US early in the year, and by the fall, cases were spiking around the country. The first case on the U of I campus appeared on September 27th, and by the second week of October, the university hospital was out of beds. University personnel converted fraternity houses and dance halls into makeshift healthcare facilities. Administrators such as the Dean of Men, Thomas Arkell Clark, the Director of University Health Services, Dr. J. Howard Beard, and the Athletic Director, George Huff, led the university's effort to contain the disease, rouse the spirits of ill students, and reassure worried parents, often working late into the night. At the height of the pandemic on campus, they even served meals to patients. In all, nearly 2,500 students were treated in university hospitals, approximately 37% of the student body, and 19 Illinois students died. However, due to the efforts of university staff and healthcare professionals, the U of I's death total was among the lowest of all state universities. On the day that would have been homecoming Saturday in a typical year, the Illinois football team played an exhibition game against a group of Navy men from Chicago behind the locked gates at Illinois Field. Before a very small crowd of military officers and Dean Clark, the Navy defeated Illinois 7-0. And some of you may remember Fred Turner, who was the Dean of Men back in the 60s. He was an undergrad at this time, and he remembers watching that game through the gates. Fun fact. So it's safe to say that the Spanish flu pandemic would have led to the cancellation of homecoming in 1918 if the war hadn't already done it. 1918 remains the only year since 1910 that the U of I has not held a homecoming celebration. Fortunately, homecoming was back in a big way in 1919, celebrating the end of World War I and the return of normalcy to campus life. The Alumni Quarterly called for a homecoming that will shake the old campus and all of us to our very foundations. And that is what happened. Nearly 12,000 alumni returned to campus. Their vehicles quickly filled the parking spots, and the university responded by turning the armory into a parking garage in a space that only a year earlier had housed more than 1,500 military trainees. That year's attendees enjoyed, excuse me, that year's attendees enjoyed all the traditional events such as reunions, dances, the pep rally, the hobo band parade, and a 10-0 football win over Chicago at Illinois Field, witnessed by 18,000 times as many people as the Illinois Navy game from the year before. That year's guests were also offered new events such as the Co-Ed Carnival, the vaudeville program I mentioned that turned into the stunt show, and would go on to become a homecoming tradition for the next 50 years. The weekend ended with a giant bonfire on Illinois Field and a beautiful fireworks display, which announced that homecoming was here to stay. The university built on that momentum in the 1920s, which can be considered a high point of our homecoming celebration. The football team was riding high on its 1919 national championship, and the university's athletic association was developing plans for a new football stadium. The new stadium would celebrate several milestones during homecoming weekends in the 1920s, including its groundbreaking in 1922, its first football game in 1923, and the famous dedication game against Michigan in 1924. The stadium completely changed the scale of our homecoming celebration by offering seating for 44,000 more fans than Illinois Field at full capacity. During the 20s, college football became extremely popular across the country, and the U of I had perfect timing to capitalize on that popularity with a great team and a new stadium, a colorful and quotable coach in Bob Zuppke, and the most famous player in America, Red Grange. Alumni returned to campus in droves for every football weekend, and especially for homecoming. In addition to the stadium, several other iconic symbols of the university were dedicated as part of the homecoming celebration in the 20s, including the Alkeld chimes in 1920, a gift from the classes of 1914 to 1921, and the U.S. School of Military Aeronautics, which had been on campus for training during the war. In 2020, the university celebrated the 100th anniversary of the chimes with a centennial concert and public events about their history and the history of alcohol in general. If you're interested in watching the recordings of those events, they're on the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences YouTube channel. Following the boom period of the 20s, the homecoming celebration once again experienced a double whammy in the form of the Great Depression and a bad football team. The popularity of homecoming went into a precipitous decline, with the Daily Illini writing that students thought, quote, all the frivolity and collegiate spirit connected with the weekend is more or less passé, unquote. Attendance by alumni and students dropped, fewer events were held, and the atmosphere of excitement that had surrounded homecoming in the 1910s and 20s largely disappeared. The 1941 homecoming game marked the end of football coach Bob Zuppke's 29-year Illinois career, and shortly thereafter, the United States entered World War II. The character of the student body changed virtually overnight, with most male students either leaving for the war or staying in campus in uniform as part of military training programs. Women students assumed control of many campus organizations for the first time and planned events such as the homecoming celebration, which had a definite wartime flavor. The stunt show included funny skits about the home front and draft dodgers, while annual traditions such as the Greek house decorating competition were suspended due to wartime rationing. Instead, fraternities decorated their houses more simply with American flags and service flags that showed the number of fraternity members who were currently serving in the war effort. The highlight of the 1944 homecoming celebration was the rededication of the stadium to honor those U of I students and alumni who had died in World War II. The students and alumni who were present hoped that brighter days lay ahead. And brighter days did lie ahead eventually. Following the war, the university's enrollment boomed due to the GI Bill, and the student body's high spirits led to the resurgence of homecoming. The 1946 event was touted as the homecoming the soldiers, sailors, and Marines had been dreaming of during those years in the foxholes, on board ship, or in a bomber over Germany. And it was the beginning of a long stretch of high popularity for our homecoming celebration. Our alumni and students enjoyed post-war prosperity and a good football team, and through the 1950s, homecoming remained one of the most cherished events on the university's calendar. In 1960, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the first homecoming with a slew of special features, including a Marching Illini halftime program that honored the event's founders, Ekblad and Williams, as well as a commemorative pushball contest. The major dedication that weekend was the Gallery of Alumni Achievement Award portraits at the Illini Union, which grew over the next 65 years to fill the entire East Hallway and part of the North Wall. And today, those portraits are on display in digital form in the Richmond Family Welcome Gallery's Achieve Discovery box and in a duplicate exhibit at the Illini Union, which will be formally dedicated a week from tomorrow, so next Friday at 1:30 p.m. They're having an event there to dedicate the digital form of the portrait gallery. So please attend if you can. The excitement over homecoming's golden anniversary carried the event through the mid 60s, and it remained popular with alumni and students. Then came the late 60s, when campus became a site of political unrest, with student demonstrations against the Vietnam War and corporate recruiting on campus, and demonstrations for civil rights, women's rights, and other progressive issues. As many students embraced the spirit of activism, they rejected long-held traditions. Student interest in homecoming became virtually non-existent, and the events were so poorly attended in 1969 that the university almost canceled homecoming outright in 1970. Though homecoming continued in the 1970s, it was not very popular. Student interest had not returned, and it didn't help that the football team was mediocre. Homecoming's organizers tried to appeal to students by hosting symposia about the Vietnam War and other socially minded events, and student participation reflected those changes, with anti-war house decorations and buttons, such as the 1970 homecoming pen, which read, "When the boys come home," referring to the US military in Vietnam. Students also made overt criticisms of homecoming traditions that they found to be, quote, irrelevant and sexist, unquote, such as the homecoming queen contest, which led to changes in the way the contest was planned and presented, including the addition of men to the homecoming court. Midway through the decade, Greek organizations on campus began to organize more homecoming events, but the celebration remained unpopular. In 1979, the Student Alumni Association, which is today called Student Alumni Ambassadors, and the U of I Alumni Association took responsibility for homecoming and tried to revitalize it. They transformed homecoming from a weekend event to a week long celebration, and during that first year, reintroduced the homecoming parade after a 10-year absence. They also held an all campus dance and organized several new traditions, including a 5K, which is now called the Homecoming Run, Orange and Blue Day, Lunch on the Quad, and the Comeback Guest Program, which invites alumni back to campus to be honored for their professional success and contributions to society. During the 1980s, there were several other additional uh, homecoming traditions that thrived on campus, such as African American homecoming. African American homecoming grew out of the step shows that Black students began organizing in the 1970s, and over the next 4 decades, the tradition grew to include a series of events sponsored by the Illini Union Board, including the African American Homecoming Party, pageant, fashion show, and step show, which featured a step competition between Black Greek chapters from the U of I and other universities. All told, the flurry of new activities and revitalized traditions, along with a good period for football, led to a strong comeback for homecoming in the 80s. By the 90s, interest in homecoming was again on the decline, with an inconsistent football team and a stagnant program of events. In 1997, the Alumni Association tried to turn things around in collaboration with the Chancellor's Office. They brought back homecoming traditions from the past, such as the bonfire and campus decorations, and placed a renewed emphasis on homecoming buttons. They also chose a fun theme that announced their plans to revitalize the event, which was Homecoming Strikes Back. The Star Wars connection was deliberate, and it was common that week to see people in Darth Vader costumes wandering around campus. The following year, the homecoming theme was Planet Illinois, and the connection to the Planet Hollywood chain of restaurants was also deliberate, with marketing graphics that even looked like the Planet Hollywood logo. Both years, homecoming was extremely popular, and both years, according to the former Alumni Association president Lauren Taylor, the Alumni Association got into hot water for using imagery, characters, and phrases in its homecoming pens, t-shirts, posters, and other marketing materials that skirted a little too close to copyright infringement. Unsurprisingly, George Lucas and Lucasfilm were not happy with the university's unapproved use of Star Wars, but they ultimately chose not to sue. Planet Hollywood, on the other hand, sent the Alumni Association a cease and desist letter that insisted that the university discontinue the use of homecoming marketing materials and the sale of homecoming merchandise by October 19th, 1998. Luckily, the homecoming game was on October 18th, and the university was able to promote and celebrate homecoming all the way up to the deadline without violating the order. We would never in a million years try something like that today. So, as the university entered a new millennium, the football team's fortunes were on the rise, and thanks to the momentum created by Homecoming Strikes Back and Planet Illinois, the celebration began to thrive. In recent years, homecoming has been on solid ground with an increase in college and department specific events and the introduction of several new traditions, including a fountain dyeing ceremony and pancake breakfast at the Alice Campbell Alumni Center, block eye, office, and decorating contests, a day of volunteer service called I Help, and more family friendly events. In addition, the alumni award ceremonies that had traditionally taken place during commencement were moved to homecoming week, echoing Ekbla and Williams' original idea to move class reunions from the spring to the fall. With that move, the Alumni Association added several new awards and today hands out honors for alumni achievement, distinguished service, humanitarianism, school spirit, young alumni, and diversity and inclusion efforts. We also added an award that we don't give out every year for honorary alumni, special non alumni whose commitment to the U of I is particularly notable. The recipients thus far have included former U of I president Stan Eikenberry, Lou Henson and his wife Mary, Krannert Center director Mike Ross and his wife Taya, and Ebertfest co founder and producer Chaz Ebert. Each year, it's a mark of optimism to say this year's homecoming will be unlike any other. But that meant something very different in 2020. Due to the pandemic, 2020's homecoming celebration was entirely virtual. The Alumni Association and Student Affairs partnered with the Division of Intercollegiate Athletics, Public Affairs, and other campus units to create a virtual experience that offered a wide variety of online events and other digital features, including interviews with alumni and students, musical performances, including one from Kevin Cronin from Mario Speedwagon, as well as the Spotify playlist that I mentioned earlier. As the university and the world began to emerge from the pandemic, the homecoming celebration evolved in 2021 as a hybrid offering, featuring a mix of in person and virtual events. And with each year that followed, as events transitioned from virtual to in person, the celebration began to look more like homecoming celebrations of old. In 2024, for the fourth year in a row, homecoming was back in person with a slew of traditional events, including the homecoming run, fountain dyeing, pancake breakfast, parade, homecoming barbecue, tailgating, and the football game. There were also several other events on the calendar, including dinner on the quad, a global talent show, a homecoming trivia contest at the Illini Union, lectures at the university library, and an outdoor party in downtown Champaign. This year's homecoming celebration will take place this upcoming week, September 21st through the 27th. The theme is Illinois, where legends began, and the program is filled with traditions, both old and new, such as the kickoff event this Sunday at the Alice Campbell Alumni Center, including the pancake breakfast and fountain dyeing. The homecoming parade on Friday evening, which, as I said earlier, will feature REO Speedwagon as the Grand Marshals. The football game against USC at 11 a.m. on Saturday. The outdoor party in downtown Champaign on Saturday night. And a Marching Illini concert at State Farm Center next Sunday, the 28th. For more information about this week's events, about the next week, not this week, next week, homecoming week's events, please visit the university's homecoming website, which is homecoming.illinois.edu. And I hope that you can join us for some or perhaps all of the events next week. And that about covers it for the history of homecoming at Illinois, uh, you know, that you can present in a digestible, bite-sized chunk. I'd like to thank you again for joining me this evening, and I hope that you'll return to campus next week for homecoming if you're out of town. If you do, please come visit me at the Alice Campbell Alumni Center to see the Richmond Family Welcome Gallery, where we have exhibits about the history of homecoming and homecoming football programs, as well as a display of homecoming pens, among our dozens of exhibits about the past, present, and future of the university. So, at this time, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have that you've put in the Q&A or uh, anywhere else here. Give me just a moment to take a look at them. Okay, first question: where was Illinois Field? So Illinois Field was it was located. Um, on what we would consider today the far north side of campus, where the Beckman Institute is on University Avenue. So the area where Beckman is, and then also the electrical and computer engineering building that's there, uh, just to the southwest of Beckman. That's where Illinois Field was, and that's where the baseball team continued to play up until the mid 80s when they began construction on Beckman, and then they built the new Illinois Field out on Florida Avenue, um, South Campus. Another question is, and this is a common this is a common understanding of why the 1918 homecoming was canceled. Many people believe that it was canceled because of the influenza pandemic, um, but it was the war. Um, there were even before the influenza pandemic was a major concern here. There had been no plans to have a homecoming celebration because of the war. Someone mentioned a satirical newspaper called The Tumor that was published as part of homecoming every year by the Sigma Delta Chi fraternity. Um, and It's not really a question, just a comment. But yeah, that's also been a common feature of homecoming is um, publications and events that have been produced by student groups that are relatively short-lived, um, but fondly remembered by people who were on campus at the time. And if you're interested in seeing the tumor, they have a bunch of issues of it out in the university archives. What was the name of the Spotify playlist? There are several of them. If you go to the Illinois 1867 Spotify account, they're named by decades. There's one U of I in the 1960s, U of I 70s, and so on, I believe is how they're named. There's a question: did Alkeld Hall originally house the law school? No. Originally, Alkeld Hall was the library. When it was constructed in the 1890s and opened in 1897, it was the very first dedicated library building that the university had. And then when it outgrew that space, and the current main library was constructed in the 1920s, that is when the law school moved in to Alkeld. And it was the law school until 1955 when they moved into the current law building down on Pennsylvania Avenue. Good question. Someone asked a question that I don't know the answer to, but that I can look into. It says, my great uncle mentioned that there used to be attempts on campus to achieve Guinness World Records, including squeezing into telephone booths. Uh, oh, and the largest number of skaters wearing fur coats. I do know about that. That happened in the 1920s. Um, but I don't know about the phone booth thing, but that's a pretty common stuff like that's been going on college campuses forever. People trying to set Guinness World Records, but other than the uh, the roller skaters wearing fur coats, uh, I'm not aware of any other ones. Roller skating became a crazy popular fad here in the 1920s. And if you look through campus publications, you'll see all sorts of illustrations of people wearing roller skates and also wearing raccoon coats, which was a really popular thing in the 20s. There, one of the most famous student photos of Red Grange is him wearing a raccoon coat. And let's see, I think I may have time for one more question. Let me see here. Oh, here's a good question that I don't know the answer to. Um, but I will look into this. So the question is, the Alumni Association asks for ideas for homecoming themes from alumni, and then there's a public vote. When did this begin? I don't know when that started. I think it's fairly recent. Um, the first time that there was a homecoming theme was in 1919 for they called it the Victory Homecoming. Um, and that is what really started the annual tradition of having a homecoming theme. But making it a democratic process where alumni can suggest a topic and then voting on it, I think is fairly recent, but I don't know the year exactly. But if there's some sort of mechanism for me to send that out here, I'd be happy to answer that question for everyone. Okay. Well, thank you again, everyone, for joining me this evening. And I hope that you'll join us for uh, future talks, both in the speaker series that the Alumni Association does and in special presentations like this one about the history of homecoming. And please join us next week for as many homecoming events as you're able to, and come to the Welcome Gallery.